Welcome back, everybody, to another exciting episode of Sprint Hard, Iterate Fast. On this episode, I had the opportunity to sit down with the Chief Product Officer from a Sydney-based fintech called Wisr. Ben's journey has taken him from startups in Israel all the way to the bustling streets of New York City and then down under to Sydney, Australia. His experiences have taught him valuable lessons about navigating the tech career ladder. In this episode, Ben and I delve into the importance of avoiding complacency, not staying too long at one company, and also prioritizing company culture over the highest salary. So whether you're a tech enthusiast or you're aspiring to jump into a tech career, this episode's going to be filled with sage advice and wisdom that you can use to navigate your own tech journey. Let's jump in. Today we're joined by our guest, Ben Berger. Ben has held senior product leadership roles at Dimension Data, The Iconic, and now he's the Chief Product Officer at Sydney, Australia-based fintech Wisr. Ben, welcome to the Sprint Hard, Iterate Fast podcast.
Thank you, Reggie. Good to be here.
Thank you. Ben, I want to start off, and I want to talk to you a little bit about Wisr. Can you tell us, our guests, our listeners, what is Wisr?
Yeah, Wisr is what we call here a non-bank lender. So we're definitely not a bank, but we do provide credit to people.
Okay.
And I guess we do that in a slightly different way to most other lenders, because we also have this whole element of what we call a financial wellness platform. And so we're not just providing credit to people, which can be a massive benefit to people in their lives, but we're also providing a whole set of tools and products and learning material that helps people sort out their financial wellness in general, outside of any loan we may or may not provide to them.
Really interesting. I'm curious to know, like, it seems like the market is definitely receiving you guys well. I'm curious to know, how are Wisr disrupting the status quo in the financial industry? What are you doing that's different or unique that really sets you apart and differentiates your business?
Yeah, I think so. Traditionally, in Australia, and it's still the case today, the vast majority of people, when they want a personal loan, they'll get them from their bank. And it's a very sort of transactional process. It's typically quite slow. Until recently, it was a paper-based process, and that's where Wisr, really came in and disrupted by being, completely digital. And so when people come to Wisr, either directly or through their broker, we're trying to make it a really seamless process and a fair process and a transparent process. And outside of that, beyond providing credit to people, whether that be for a medical situation or a new set of wheels or a kitchen renovation or whatever it is, or consolidating debt. Outside of that, we've got this, as I said, we've got this financial wellness platform. So we're helping people to understand their credit scores. We're encouraging people where they're able to pay off their debt or their loan with us as quickly as they sensibly can. And we don't charge them for that. And whereas often if you get a loan, they'll actually charge you for paying it back early, which is kind of crazy and not very user-centric. So there's a bunch of ways where we're constantly trying to look at building a richer relationship with our users and customers in a way that you probably wouldn't really get from a traditional financial institution.
Yeah, makes sense. And so I'm interested to know as well, you being in the Chief Product Officer role, thinking about experimentation. So on the Sprint Hard, Iterate Fast podcast, we like to talk about products. We like to talk about experimentation, innovation. What is your approach to experimentation? And I would imagine that, being in a highly regulated environment, there wouldn't be, you'd have to have some kind of structured process of how you experiment. So what does that look like at Wisr?
Yeah, I don't know how structured it is. There are definitely, we have a group of colleagues who are very focused on compliance and making sure we do the right thing by the book, and that's a healthy dynamic to have within Wisr. But we're all about metrics first. So before we do anything, we're kind of thinking, what are we trying to move? What are the numbers or indicators or themes that we're trying to move, and how are we going to measure them? And that's, if we haven't worked that out, then we're probably not really starting something, even an experiment. Um, and and there is a pretty healthy experimental culture. So, we've put in the technology to do A/B tests. Our design team have a whole set of tools that they use, like Maze and Askable and Dovetail, to do all kind of user tests before we start heavily having to code things, and get that insight. And even on things like, we've got some new features that we're building out, and we don't know what to call them. So we're just like, let's just test that stuff. I mean, it's not, there's nothing compliance related to that. But so we're doing those kind of tests. We're seeing how people react. And if things don't work, then we stop doing them. And that's often the hard thing, but that's the healthy thing to do.
Yeah, makes sense and extremely pragmatic. I want to talk a little bit about how you got to where you are today. So a lot of people listening would be looking to shift into a career in tech, or they're already in tech and looking to get ahead and advance their career. Can you take us on a journey of how you ended up as the Chief Product Officer of Wisr? I'd love to hear your story.
It's a reasonably long journey. I'll try and be quick. I originally was interested in psychology. That's what I studied, and at the same time as that, I had this cousin called Peter, who, really back in the early days of home computers, right? He was tapping away and writing programs and sending out cassette tapes and making loads of money, and so this whole kind of computer thing got me interested. And there were these two tracks in my life: this kind of interest in psychology and this interest in technology. And it sort of came together because there was a guy. There's a field called, at the time it was called human computer interaction. Today it would be more like UX or user experience or UI design. And so that's really where I started. So 20 odd years ago, a little bit more, my first job was in a startup, having done a master's in industrial and employment psychology, where really I focused on the sort of UX side of things, and how do we build technology to fit the way people think and process information and deliberate, right? And I got this job in a startup as a designer within a product team, and then the startup was incredibly successful, and there was a position in the product team, and that went well. And then at some point, the CEO said to me, "Do you want to go set up a product management practice in the US?" And I'm like, "Yes, let's go do that."
That's exciting.
And so we moved. Yeah, it was. It was exciting. It was crazy. We had 2 little babies at the time, and we moved over to New York.
Yeah. And that was from London, is that right?
No, I grew up in London, which you probably tell by the accent, but we actually spent 10 years in Israel.
Okay.
In Jerusalem, and which is an incredible sort of hub of innovation. Crazy place to live, but great place for technology. And we were there for 10 years, and we got an opportunity to move to the States, and we grabbed it, and we were in the US, and the startup got acquired while we were there. It's a long story. Eventually, we ended up in Sydney, Australia, because my wife's family was here, and I've worked in lots of different places, like from startups through to IBM and things in between, and they all have pros and cons, but basically, I've been in product teams, design and product teams for that whole period.
Well, that's incredible. So three different continents, vastly different work environments, I would imagine, and then having worked in small companies that have grown fast to big companies. I suspect that's something that our listeners would be interested in as well, is like, what is the difference between, having product role in, a small startup that's growing quickly versus, taking something with a larger, more established company. Maybe you could talk to us about that.
Yeah, I mean, and different people have different preferences, right? So I don't deal well with big company bureaucracy.
Okay.
And jumping through hoops and things moving slowly. That's just me. And obviously I've kind of portrayed that with a negative slant, but that's me. So I'm happiest in a relatively small organization where, can really make an impact. You can do things quickly. You can turn on a dime. That's my happy space. Having said that, when we got acquired by IBM, it was an amazing experience. They had incredibly talented sales team. I spent, a good 6 months or so, pretty much every week on a plane with them. And you learn a tremendous amount from those people and how they interact and how they engage. And it was very, very impressive. I'm happier in a kind of more nimble, smaller, fast-moving, dynamic place, personally.
Ben, if you could think back to when you were young and thinking about the diverse career you've had, 3 continents, multiple startups, big companies, small companies, what could you have told your younger self that might have prepared you for this journey?
Yeah, I guess I don't know. I don't know if I've had big challenges, to be honest. I've learned stuff along the way. I've made mistakes along the way. I'm not someone typically that goes back and worries too much about, what would I have done differently. But I would have done things differently. There was one company I worked for about 7 years. Great place, very comfortable. People end up staying there 20, 30 years. But if I think about it from a career perspective, that wasn't a smart thing to do.
For you to stay that long?
Well, for me and actually for most people, I think. Because for the most part, you're not gonna learn as much, right? So change really represents learning opportunity, and so so that's kind of something I've reflected on. I think I think there are places you can get very comfortable in, which is nice, but it's not necessarily good in terms of personal development, I guess.
I know what you're talking about because I worked for a large financial institution for nearly 6 years, and that was a short stint compared to the majority of people who work there. And I felt that that whole feeling of if I stay here, I might stagnate. What would your advice be for people who might find themselves in a very comfortable organization right now, but have a desire to challenge themselves in particularly around the technology space? Because a lot of people that I've spoken with, they are in relatively good jobs, but probably not the highest paying, and maybe have a bit of a ceiling there, but they can be a bit comfortable, complacent. What would you tell them based on your experience?
Well, I think that the challenge is, and it's easier said than done, you kind of got to disrupt yourself and get out of your comfort zone, or not. And honestly, on the converse of all this is one of the things that a lot of people do is they're like, oh, how am I going to get more money? How am I going to get the next promotion? How am I going to go up the ladder, right? And at a certain point, most people, I hope, get to a realization that you don't want to keep doing that, because it comes with headache and stress, and it takes a certain amount of maturity to kind of actually think, what do you want to do? What do you care about? What do you value? As opposed to these kind of more conventional goals of, I've got to be a senior this, and I've got to be a lead that, and I've got to be a principal that, right? And that's what most people do, at least for a lot of their career. And I think, some of the more impressive people I know have kind of thought quite deeply about what do they care about at work, because we spend a huge amount of time and energy at work.
Yeah.
And, you can get that promotion and you can get more money and whatever, but you have to kind of reflect, well, what's important to you at that time in your life.
I think that's really fascinating, and I'm keen to kind of follow that a little bit, and also follow up on something you mentioned. You said that you had made mistakes. Is there a mistake that you want to share with us today so that we might be mindful of that for ourselves in our own career journeys?
I guess the one I sort of mentioned, which is getting complacent and staying somewhere for too long.
Yeah.
And that's probably the main one. And there was another place. I won't name the company, but there was another place I worked, and I was only there for a short period. And they acquired another company that overlapped with what I was working on. And I came back from a business trip one day, and they're like, Ben, your position is this, whatever the terminology they use. They basically said you're fired, but they kind of put it more politely, or your position is no longer needed, right? So, and my reflection on that is that was actually a very unhappy period of my career. It was a very dysfunctional organization. And but my reflection is, if that acquisition hadn't happened and they hadn't said goodbye, I might have stayed there and tried, and just been, because of inertia and whatever. Honestly, it was the best thing that happened to me at the time. It was horrible, but looking back, I'm like, thank God, it was that place was awful, and I'm not sure that I would have got myself out of it. Or I would have wasted a lot of time and energy and heartache by staying there.
Yeah.
So I haven't always made, the smartest decisions. I've had quite a lot of luck. I've been fortunate in many ways, but yeah, it's. I think people don't reflect on. You got to take a step back and really do the thinking about what's important to you.
That's really good, and I think that's solid advice. For anyone, trying to progress in their careers is taking a step back and thinking about what's really important. And I like what you said too about, where we spend our time. And I think there can be this race to get ahead, but understanding, is that quality time.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really good point.
I would say for 10 or so years, when people have asked me and I've had conversations about opportunities, I've kind of said, well, culture is really important to me. And actually, it's only for the last 5-6 years where I've really understood what that means. It's something it was a kind of glib comment that I would say, having worked in some amazing places, but also some dysfunctional places, I'm like, yeah, I know where I want to work now. I know what I don't want to deal with, and I know the type of culture and people and atmosphere where I want to engage.
So I think that's really interesting. You talking about culture, and I want to talk about culture here in a second. Can you tell us a little bit more what you mean when you say you know more? Like in the last 5-10 years, you've really started to understand what that means. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, I think and it'll be different for different people, right? But people want to be. My view is people want to be valued and listened to and appreciated and trusted, and not, all the opposite of those things. And it sounds relatively easy, but there are many organizations that don't do that or don't behave in that way. Um, and so those are the things that are important to me. And I've had, I've knocked in the course of my career, I've knocked back opportunities, particularly more in the last decade or so, where you get a smell, and it's like, do I want to? No, that reminds me of that place, or do I? I don't want to deal with that every day, right? I literally went for an interview once, and the guy asked me a question. I can't remember what the question was, and I gave him an answer, and he said, and then he started like asking me other questions, which were kind of like trying to work out whether I'd told the truth the first time. I'm like, dude, if this is how you communicate and interact? I'm like, I don't think this is, I don't think this is going to work out.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of I'm sensitive to it, and
Yeah.
and I don't always get it right, but I'm careful about, because I'm going to spend, according to a contract, I'm going to spend 40 hours, and in reality, I'm going to spend more time and more headspace.
Yep.
And if it's not somewhere where I want to work for a mission that I'm engaged with people that are pleasant to hang out with, then that's it's not going to speak to me.
Yep. I feel like that's some really good. I'll call that wisdom. It's having lived through. It sounds like you've probably lived through some difficult cultures. You've worked in some difficult cultures, and you've learned what that's like. I think in a startup environment, that can be, you know, that could be anything. I've worked in several startups, and I've seen how the culture can be a bit crazy sometimes, and so you take a step back and you think, is that what I really want? Even just what you told me about an interview you had where you kind of got a little smell that maybe something's a little bit off here,
Yeah,
and I think
yeah,
that starts to come with some time, having worked in some difficult places.
yeah.
Culture is an interesting. Go ahead.
The irony is, so the first startup I worked with was in financial services, right? The customers were some of the world, it was like MetLife, New York Life, Goldman Sachs, big financial services companies globally. Credit Suisse, First Boston, a whole bunch. That doesn't exist anymore. Anyway, so and I, after working with those in those companies and doing implementation, I was like, I never want to work in financial services. So I'm like, I've ended up in Wisr, and my better half, my partner, kind of like, laughs at me that I've ended up in. We're not a bank, right? But it's kind of financial services. So I never ever in a million years thought I would end up in anything to do with financial services. But Wisr is different, and it does have a great culture, and it doesn't have the toxicity that comes with some of those other types of organizations.
I want to talk about culture more, and I think it's particularly interesting speaking with you about it because you're in a senior leadership position. So my belief is that culture is created by the leaders, certainly the founders, but the leaders. So I'm interested to know, how do you? I want to hear about Wisr's culture, but I want you to tell us, how do you maintain a positive and productive culture, during, massive growth? And I've looked at Wisr over the last few years. You guys you've grown substantially. So, and I know, we both know from the startup world that growth is painful. Like it's hard and it hurts, and there's always change. And
No, I don't. I'm not sure I agree. I think
okay,
building, well, building good culture in when you're growing is easy.
mm,
It's when it's maintaining culture and having great culture when you're static, right? You're not growing, or your target is to grow 1.5% this year, right?
yeah,
Or you're declining. That's when it's hard,
yeah,
right? But when you're on a growth journey and you're being successful as a group of people on a mission, that's invigorating and energizing, and it's actually, that in my mind is an easy place to do it. Now you can get, and I think maybe what you're referring to, these kind of insane startup cultures where there is and that there's a time and a place, and that can be fun, right? But
yeah,
you have to be up for it. And I'm in this kind of funny mindset where I know in some ways I don't like change, right?
mm,
But I know that change is valuable and important both for me and the organization.
mm,
And so I have to kind of work out how to embrace it. And it normally takes me about 36, 48 hours,
yeah,
right? Somebody comes along with a big change, and I'm like, and then I'm like, okay, let me think about that. And I've had colleagues who kind of picked up on this, Benism, and it's like, just sleep on it. We'll talk again tomorrow.
mm,
So, but that's kind of how I am. But I don't think it's if change is sensible, well explained, communicated, plausible, then it's okay.
yeah,
If it's change because there's some leadership group on high that can't make their mind up and is like every 3 weeks changing their mind about priorities, that's a pain in the ass.
yeah, yeah,
And they're very different. It's how it's managed and where it comes from.
yeah. Well, that makes total sense, and I think what you said is true. When you're winning, it can be a lot of fun. It can be really awesome. So, in your role, you would have teams that you lead. Um, on the Sprint Hard, Iterate Fast podcast, we like to create an opportunity for a shout out. I wonder if there's anyone on your team, any individual or team that you might say is, playing a crucial role in shaping culture or driving growth or, creating some contribution that you really want to recognize.
That is an incredibly dangerous question, and I'm not going to answer because it's
Very
like,
diplomatic.
when you, well, no, it's like when you're doing a release announcement and you mention the nine people that made a massive effort, and you always forget the one, right?
Yeah.
So, so I'm not going to answer it. We have an incredible bunch of people at Wisr. I feel really blessed to work
Mm,
with them, um, and they're quite different. There are lots of different personalities. I've got I'm not gonna name her, but I've got someone who's a incredibly structured finance head. Right? She's you got a gnarly project to get done. She's gonna just nail it, right? And then I've got other people who come from much more creative, dynamic backgrounds, and they're gonna work in different ways, and it's actually the mix that kind of makes it
mm.
all work. So I'm not going to name names, but yeah, I feel incredibly. They know who they are. We've got a great team of people, and
Yeah,
I'm very, like I said, I'm very blessed to work with them.
that's really awesome. Um, you sound really positive about the culture at Wiser. Can you tell us what makes it such a great place?
Um, yeah, it's hard to put a finger on it. I think there is some truth that um, so we describe ourselves as a purpose-led organization, and the purpose is to help Australians improve their financial wellness or their financial lives, and we do that by providing credit and a whole range of other services and tools. And I think that attracts a certain type of people,
Mm,
and I think it's genuine. It's not just a kind of slogan on a wall. I think genuinely people are motivated, or some people are motivated by that sort of mission, um, and it permeates what we do. So not, some of it's a little bit distant from that, but a lot of what we do is really connected to that mission.
yeah.
So I think that's a key underpinning. Um, and then we have a leadership team that gets on very well together. We're quite a diverse, eclectic bunch,
Mm,
but we really work well together, and that helps because if we don't have that, it can get messy.
yeah.
Um, and yeah, I think those are probably a couple of things that I'm sure there's a lot more, but there's a couple of things worth calling out.
Ben, as we close out this episode, I want to ask you for three pieces of advice that you'd have for anyone who wanted to apply and work at Wiser. What would you tell them to do to stand out and perhaps be noticed? What advice would you
Yeah,
have for them?
I don't even I tell you what my reflections are on interviewing quite a lot of people, not just at Wiser. Um, it really shits me when someone comes along for for a an interview or a conversation and they haven't done the research.
Mm,
Like install the bloody product. I
mm,
mean, I don't mean get a loan, but there's lots of the Wise. There's lots of other things that are free, and so I ask people, what did you did you install the product? What do you think about it, right? Particularly if it's a product or design related, and it's amazing to me that people haven't done that basic step, right?
mm,
Um, so do your research, and that might be try the product or learn about the company. Um, Ask questions um, that tell you whether you want to work at this place,
mm,
right? Don't be afraid. Like you're in my mind, an interview ought to be and is a two-way. It's a two-way engagement, right? And you need to have confidence in yourself and find the right tone to be able to do that. But ask questions about that are going to help you understand, do I want to spend 40, 60, whatever, 40, 40, 50 hours a week in this place, right? And the third one I would say is, which people don't do, is come with data. And what I mean by that is, you're going to get asked about what you did or what you've achieved, and just think, what difference did you make?
Yeah.
Right? Don't say, oh, I sat on the compliance subcommittee and we went through this certification. I'm like, who gives a shit? Right? What difference did you make to this organization that you were working in? Right? And if you can't, and everyone can do that if they think about it, but people don't, right? But it makes it. That's my advice for anyone going to any interview. It's not really a Wisr thing.
Yeah.
But it does drive me crazy when people don't try a product when you're going to talk to a product company.
Yeah. Fantastic. Ben Berger, Chief Product Officer at FinTech Wisr based in Sydney. Thank you so much for joining us on the Sprint Hard Iterate Fast podcast.
Lovely to talk to you, Reggie. It's been a pleasure. Have a great day.